All right, we'll jump back in. So, one of the strategies that I have been practicing with folks who work in schools, that the feedback has been that this has been really helpful, both in terms of increasing the effectiveness of our interventions, as well as increasing our own well-being as we move through stressful interactions and situations in our day, is something that I call this a curious stance, or the stance of curiosity. So basically, it's sort of a cheat sheet of steps that we want to try to practice and keep in mind as we move through situations, both to self-protect and buffer how much we're absorbing of other people's stuff, and how we're kind of making sense of what's happening, as well as help us to be most effective. So I think many of you are probably experts in this, but basically the sequence is when someone is responding in a surprising or unexpected way, and this could be a student, a colleague, the parent of a student, somebody else, you want to first of all remind yourself, I see the behavior, the context for the behavior, what's driving it, and potentially any associations that have been evoked for them are not visible to me. That's a mystery. So then you step over the behavior. We do not respond to the behavior yet. We step over the behavior and we try to be curious, either within our own minds and or within our questions, to understand what is the unmet need. What we do not do is ask someone why they're doing what they're doing while they're still upset. Our questions within our own mind and to that person are, what do you need? How are you feeling? How can I help meet unmet needs and get you back on routine? As you do that, as you say to yourself, wow, I didn't expect this. I wonder what it feels like to be that person right now. I wonder what they might need. What do I know about them that would help me understand what their unmet needs are? It has a function of keeping your rational brain online, and it prevents you from reverting back to your own instincts and limbic system. So basically, it keeps you in that wise mind place, because when you're startled, your brain will actually fly back to emotions and instincts and turn off rational thinking, because it thinks that you need to be in survival mode. And if you and the other person are both in survival mode, things are not going to go well. So by asking yourself those curious questions, you stay online. And it also helps you remember, this is not about me. It's very unlikely that this is about you, how confident you are, how they feel about you, or your relationship with that person. As you're starting to sort out what is it that they need, it helps you then ask yourself, what is my role in this? And then stay in it for self-preservation throughout this year, also for being less confusing to our students, coworkers, and families. We want to all stay in our role, especially this year. Predictability regulates. So if people stay solidly in their roles in various situations, it helps people know what to expect from each other. And it also helps us not continually overextend ourselves in a way that contributes to our burnout. So if I'm talking to Dave and he's having a temper tantrum because I accidentally took a sip from his water bottle thinking it was mine, I would be like, oh, I did not expect this from Dave. He's usually such a calm guy, right? So I don't know what is driving this. I could make some educated guesses, like maybe he's having a hard time with COVID and like being back at work, and like now there's a germ thing and he probably really liked that water. And so I'm going to ignore the temper tantrum and the things he's saying and doing and be curious, not take it personal. This very likely has nothing to do with me or how he feels about me. And then I'm going to realize Dave's a colleague. It's not really my role in his life to help him manage emotions. So I'm actually just going to say, hey, Dave, I'm super sorry. I'm going to go get you another water because I didn't mean to do that. And I hope that your day goes better. I go get another water, drop it back off, and move on with my role, what I was doing that day. If I wanted to, I could do what we call strike while the iron is cold, which is once everything has settled and calmed down, later that day, the next day, I could come back around and I could say, hey, Dave, that was really unexpected. Like, are you okay now? Like, that didn't actually like feel very good, the things that you said. Like next time, how might we do that different so that like you can get your needs met and I can also like feel a little bit more comfortable. So we can come back around to it if we want to later. If I said to Dave, why are you freaking out about your water bottle while he's freaking out, he's likely to freak out more, right? As we all know that. That's basic behavior intervention. So we all know that when we're in an overwhelming personal state, sometimes we lose our grounding with our basic skills. So I don't pretend that you all don't know this. You're very good at this. It's just a cheat sheet to remind you if you lose your roadmap because you're overwhelmed as you move back into work this year, if you keep this with you, it can help you remember what are the basic things that you do, what is the sequence, and you can also practice it with your work teams around various scenarios that seem to be repeatedly coming up with your student or with their family or with other situations. And then I have this funny video that kind of reminds me of the stance of curiosity, and that when we're interacting with someone who is acting in a surprising or unexpected way, and we jump right to fix it, problem solving solutions, that is actually not what people need when they're dysregulated. They simply need validation and co-regulation. And then later on, strike while the iron is cold, later on, we regain the ability to access rational thought. So we'll just watch this funny video that you can remind yourself to not try to fix it when people are still dysregulated.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't!
Try to see things my way.
Oh, my favorite part is when she says all her sweaters are snagged. Oh my gosh. All right, moving on. So while I know that you're probably incredibly good at the stance of curiosity, the question that I would want you to ask yourself right now is, how good are you at the internal aspect of that? How good are you at not taking it personally? How good are you at staying in your role? How good are you at recognizing that this is a typical response to stress, and that what's happening right now is not about me? And then a really important question is that in order to pull off the curious stance internally, part of what we need to do is leave the emotion that that person is feeling with them when we walk away from the interaction. So you are all helping professionals and you are all practiced at this skill of empathy. And empathy means that when you are interacting with another person, you have an ability to feel what they're feeling. That's human nature. And it's a tool, it's information that you use to answer the questions I wonder how they're feeling. I wonder what they need. I wonder how I can help them regulate. So by feeling what another person is feeling, you're gaining information that you can use strategically to be good at your job. It is not what you're feeling, and it is not about you. So after you've done interacting with that person and you've finished whatever it is, the intervention that you're going to do, and you turn and walk away from them, you need to leave the emotion that you felt with them. And this goes for your personal life and your professional life, because when we empathize with someone and we take on their emotions, we don't actually lower their emotional load. So even if it's my child, even if it's people that I'm really close with, and like if my child is furious about something and I feel uncomfortable in my gut and angry too on her behalf, and I use that as information to validate, it seems like you're furious. I can't believe that happened. I'm so glad you told me. I know that you can figure this out. I believe in you. How can I help? And if my daughter says, I don't know, mom, stay out of it. Okay, I guess I'll go get Ben and Jerry's for us, because that's really the solution to everything is Ben and Jerry's. So I'll go get Ben and Jerry's. We'll feel better. So as I'm driving to the store to get the Ben and Jerry's, I need to say to myself, I'm still furious. This is not my furious, right? I need to send it back to my daughter and let her hold it, because if I hold her furious, she doesn't feel any less furious. And I'm actually now a less effective co-regulator, right? I'm more likely to overreact or steer her wrong or keep her agitated unless I can calm myself down. So we both need Ben and Jerry's, and I need to let her hold her furious and use it as information and recognize that it's not mine. So when you start your work day, it's a really good thing for you to have a ritual where you somehow have a sticky note or a reminder in your car or at home or somewhere before you actually start your day, to just say, how am I feeling? What is my stuff today? So that if you check in briefly with yourself and you're like, I'm feeling pretty good, actually, like, tired, need more coffee, emotionally pretty neutral. Great. 2 hours from then, if you are furious and nothing's really happened that directly impacted you, it's not yours. You're carrying other people's stuff, right? If you go into the day furious and 2 hours later you're furious, well, you need to own that. You brought that with you, right? So it's sort of just like that idea of mindfulness and awareness helps you figure out as you go through the day, and like other people's stuff is so fluidly moving through you. You can recognize as you're moving through the day, this is not mine, send it back. That brief pause, I'm feeling anxious. That's actually my student's anxiety, not mine. Send it back, right? Deep breath, blow it back. You'll get better. Your cognitive strength to do that increases with practice. So you hear me say that, and many of you would say, that's so much easier said than done, Joelle. I think I send it back and then, oh, there it is again. Right. Yeah. Because you're a good person and you're good at your job. That's why this is hard, because you're a good person and you're good at your job. So with meditation, mindfulness, and various tricks and techniques, every time it arrives again, you breathe it out, you imagine a bird picking it up and flying it back, whatever you want to do. The more you practice it, I promise you, this used to be excruciatingly hard for me, and I'm so much better at it now, simply because I kept practicing it. So whatever metaphorical or trick you need to do, practice it. Your cognitive muscle for this will get stronger. This is where the bubble bath image of you can't bubble bath this SHIT away came from, was this idea that you can't interact with one person who's furious and now you have a little furious, then you interact with somebody else who's sad and you got the sad, then somebody's joyful and you got the joy, and then somebody's like terrified, you got the terror. You can't load all that up and then go home and expect to just soak in a bubble bath and have it all disappear. You're going to get in the tub and you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm a hot mess, right? None of it was yours. So it's a little bit better if you can try to move through the day and recognize as it's happening, and then have a strategic plan to release that as well. Okay. So question that I would love for you to answer in the chat is 2 questions. Are there parts of this that you think you're good at? Are there parts of this that are more challenging for you? So if you could write, I'm good at, or what's hard for me is, or good, hard. And then in the chat, we can kind of see what each other's experience of this is. Mhm. Well, you guys are so self-aware. Yeah. Really great comments. Yeah. Yep. So I think I'm just going to stop share for a minute and move to another part of the presentation, because a lot of what you all are mentioning is something that I have towards the end, and I want to make sure that we don't run out of time for it. So let me just shift to this part to speak to some of what you all are saying. Okay. Yeah, and let me just speak to the SOAR behavior team's comment. When you don't carry the emotions of other people with you, it's hard to know the difference between doing that in a healthy way and being overly cold or indifferent. You know, what's fascinating that you mentioned that is that as I've been talking about this idea of understanding our own capacity for empathy and working with that as a helping professional, one of the things I've commented on in a few different of these trainings is I've said that as a mental health professional, we are actually trained, we're trained for years. And part of our training is how to sit with people who are suffering, who are in distress, who are struggling, and bear witness to that in a way that we do genuinely and empathically connect to their experience and validate it and help them work to improve it, and then move right on to the next appointment and the next scenario, and then right on to the next scenario. So we're trained to be able to move through a lot of different people's distress, bear witness to that, and authentically connect. Some of my clients are some of the most important people in my life, and I'm not afraid to say that. Like, they're beautiful people that I really care about. And they're in my professional life, and there's clear boundaries around that. But that doesn't mean that I don't have an authentic and really important relationship with them, right? But the idea is that we're trained to be able to do that and then drive home eat a cheeseburger with your family and really be fine. And that does not mean that I'm a sociopath, that I can do that, right? Like there is a difference. And so I think some people say, I'm almost too good at that. So I wonder, have I become jaded or cold? Well, that could be a sign of burnout. So certainly it's something, if you're wondering that, I can't tell you yes or no, pay attention, but likely no. Likely you're just very good at processing and recognizing this is information, but it's not mine. The problem is people who work in schools are also helping professionals who also empathize with people who are suffering, who also bear witness to other people's struggle, but they do not have the years of training that mental health professionals have to figure out and learn with practice, guidance, supervision, and support on a very frequent, consistent basis to figure out how to make meaning of that and make sense of it and process it in such a way that you don't go down with the ship, right? So I think that what we will talk more about this school year with people who are educational professionals is this idea of empathy and compassion and self-preservation, and what does all that mean? And there is a way to be genuinely engaged and authentically connected, but also well. And you can be having a good day and be working with someone who is in a desperate situation. That's possible. So so that's fascinating that you bring that up. Okay, so the other thing I would say is that some of what I read in the chat just then was about people saying that when you go home, it might be hard to let go of what you experienced or to stop kind of processing. Could I have done something different? Could I have done something more? So I thought it would be helpful just to speak up for a minute about strategies to shift. What's the difference between productive rumination or worry and unproductive rumination or worry? These are strategies that you can do yourself. You could also use them with your clients and with other people in your life. So basically, there's a difference between productive worry and hamster wheel. Hamster wheel is you're just going over the situation over and over and over again, and you're picking apart everything that you did. And once you've decided that you could have done everything better and that you pretty much suck and you should be an alpaca farmer, as soon as you're done with that, you start again, right? And it's misery because you can't get off the hamster wheel. So what to do when you find yourself? So first of all, we always start when we're having any kind of stress inspired response to increase awareness and normalize what's going on. Information normalizes and provides immediate relief. So when we worry, there's nothing wrong with us. Worry is a healthy human function that helps us learn from experience, prevent potential, problems, and gain more wisdom. But there's a tipping point where it goes from productive to unproductive. So basically, repeatedly figuring out how we could be at fault is actually a healthy human function, because your brain is telling you, we just had an awful experience, or we're guessing an awful experience is coming, and we want to figure out how to be strategic and prevent it or not get into it again. So they did this fascinating research. This is like 20 plus years ago, where they actually interviewed a bunch of people that were in police stations. And all of these people had an experience where they were like something like a mugging, right? Like you're walking down the street and somebody runs up and takes your purse or wallet in a brief, violent interaction, and then runs away, and then the person ends up in the police station. So they watched what was happening, observed what was happening, and interviewed people. And so what they found was fascinating. People were, the vast majority of people said things that indicated that they were trying to figure out how what just happened was their fault. The reason these situations were helpful to study is that they were so clearly not the person's fault, right? A mugging is not the muggie's fault. So people were saying things like, I shouldn't have been walking down that street. I shouldn't have had so much cash on me. I wish I'd had my backpack on the front of my body instead of the back. All of these grasping at how it could have been their fault. And then they found that most of the time when their loved one showed up or other people were trying to soothe them, they were mostly saying, it's not your fault. It couldn't possibly be your fault. There's nothing you could have done. And then they were finding that those responses made people feel worse, not better. And when they analyzed this, what they discovered is that when something happens to us that is a random act of that provokes distress, the only thing worse than thinking about that potentially happening again is thinking that there's nothing that you could do to prevent it from happening again, which means there has to be some way that you contributed to that happening so that you can regain some sense of control over preventing it from happening again. So the most helpful response was when people were able to say, okay, let's, for a timed period, once the person has calmed down, let's think about what you could have done differently to prevent that from happening or respond to it. Let's learn from it. And then when the time is up, no more. That's it. We're just going to then move into taking care of you and helping you recover. So when people had a period of time where someone that they trusted or a supportive other person said, maybe you should not have been walking at night on Church Street in the dark. Like, let's never do that again. Okay, that's number one. What else? You had $200 in cash on you. Why do you need that when you have a debit card? Let's never do that again, right? And so we come up with some, like, what can we learn? We have a new plan. And now a 10-minute timer went off. Okay, that's it. Now we're going to take the wisdom that we gained from this experience that life threw at us, and we're going to let it go. We're going to move on with the wisdom that we gained. And now it's about a different process. So the steps to this would be, you're home and you're ruminating about your day and you're like, oh my gosh, that kid totally, like, the whole classroom had to clear. And I think I might have provoked that. I think I could have done something totally different. I think the teacher and some of the other parents are upset. And now you're fantasizing about how everything that you did could have been better. And then you learn from it what you can, and then you start the whole process again. You're like, this is really uncomfortable. I want to be able to enjoy my evening. It was a terrible day. First of all, tell yourself, this is a healthy brain function of worry. I'm going to set a timer. Please don't do this for more than 10 minutes if it was a situation of that magnitude. Bigger life traumas require more time, right? So please don't do it for more than 10 minutes if it was just like a bad moment at work. You could ask a loved one to join you if you want, and their job is to help you think about how you were at fault. Like, they're supposed to really join in on this with you, right? It's like, yeah, maybe you could have done this, maybe you could have done that. So process with a colleague, process with a friend, or do it on your own. And you really think hard, worry hard for 10 minutes. What could I have done different? When the timer goes off, now you have some kind of ritual. The more you practice the ritual, the more power it will take. So the ritual could be, what I say to myself is, what I'll do is I'll go through something that I did at work that didn't go as well as I hoped. And I keep going over it and over it. So I have a bit of a drive most days to get home. So I say to myself, I'm going to think about this while I drive. And when I pull in my garage, that's it. It's going to be done. So when I pull in the garage and I turn the car off and I've gained the wisdom that I can, I say to myself, I did my best based on the resources I had today. Let that be good enough. Tomorrow's another opportunity to try again. I walk in the house and I start ruminating again. And I repeat the script. And over months and years, that script has gained soothing and comforting power, where my actual emotional and cognitive focus shifts. All of these techniques only work if you repeat them, which is especially important to tell teenagers if you're giving this advice to teenagers. I did a training with some middle schoolers last year, and I was teaching this group of middle schoolers this strategy. And then after the training, they were supposed to do a homework assignment where they wrote me a letter or an email. And most of them said, oh, I tried it and it didn't work. What else you got? I was like, oh, shoot, I forgot to tell them it was going to take a lot of repetitions. So your ritual, your ending ritual, transition shifting ritual could be dance it out, listen to a song, drink a cup of tea, take a shower, take a walk, whatever it is. If you repeat it, it gets soothing power. And sometimes you need a sensory based shift. So the research would suggest that if you're stuck in a ruminative cycle, changing your temperature helps. So if you're warm, you can drink a cold glass of water. If it's winter, you can go outside and get some cold, fresh air. If you're cool, you could have a hot beverage or take a hot shower. Rigorous, short bursts of movement help. Dancing, music, anything that's soothing or rhythmic. Reading, cognitive distraction. One of the school nurses that I work with has a brilliant technique with a student that actually has a pretty significant obsessive compulsive disorder. And she gave him a Where's Waldo page. And as he found Waldo, she would hand him another one. And basically it provided him with mindlessness or cognitive distraction, where it pulled him out and he focused on something. And after a certain number of pages, he was actually feeling better and able to return to his routine. There's also a lot of fascinating research that would suggest that writing, you can either write on behalf of someone who's stuck in worry, or you can write yourself. Either way, interestingly, if you were worried and I wrote down your worries for you, you would have almost as much benefit as writing it down for yourself, which is great for very young kids or for people who are too upset to write. There's a couple articles here that discuss in more depth that research in these strategies around using writing. One of the things that they talk about is the idea of a parking lot. So if you're really distracted, like let's say you get home from work and you're trying to have dinner with your family and you just keep thinking about work and your family feels like you're kind of distant or distracted and that's impacting your connection to them, you can just say to your family, all right, I'm going to have a sticky note at dinner. And I know that's really like weird, but I'm just, as I think of a work thing, I'm going to jot it down in my parking lot so that I can increasingly focus on all of you. So when something keeps swirling in your brain, you write it down, and our brain somehow trusts, once it's written down, that we're not going to forget, and it will let it go. Otherwise, if you have a problem, your brain is in fact wired to keep reminding you of that problem until it is solved. And if it's an unsolvable problem, you're in trouble because it's going to keep circulating through. Writing it down seems to break that cycle. If you are someone who has sleep impacted by work, and you write down, you have a worry time every evening scheduled, and somehow the magic number seems to be 7 to 10 minutes. If you schedule worry time and you worry as hard as you can about everything, anything, no rules, just worry. Write it all down as you're worrying. And then when the timer goes off, you have that little transition ritual. Research would suggest that over time you will sleep a lot better, you will concentrate better, you will be less distracted, and your ability to enjoy joyful parts of life will improve. Worry time's been around for a long time, and actually last year when I worked with a whole bunch of parents who were struggling with kids worrying, worry time ended up being one of the most helpful strategies that we practiced. Okay, thoughts or questions about that? Back to where we left off. Okay. Oh, I like it. Being mindful instead of having a mindful. I love it. Okay. All right, back to screen share. Yeah, Sarah's saying often my biggest worry is what I'll forget to get done. So my worry time is often my next day's to-do list. Perfect. Yeah, last night I told my husband 4 things I needed to do. And then I was like, I'm going to sleep better if I go write them down. So I just went and wrote them down. Worked perfectly. Okay. So one of my favorite techniques in terms of this idea of increasing awareness is to understand the neuroscience behind things. So I love, obviously, I'm a psychologist, so I geek out on this stuff, but I love to understand the neuroscience behind some of this. So the struggle that we have with empathy in part connects to something that we call mirror neurons. So I found this video. It's actually really old. So this guy's going to say that this is hot off the presses, but it's actually 20 plus years old. So this is not new information, but it's still 100% accurate and relevant. And it's a great video to just remind us of our empathic ability is one of our greatest assets, as well as sources of vulnerability. So we'll watch this and then we'll talk a little bit about how this can help us. And Dave, if you could give me a thumbs up that you can hear the audio, that would be great.
Hello again. Gaze into a mirror, and what do you see? Well, I see my face, of course, but in my face, I see moods, I see shifts of feeling. We humans are really good at reading faces and bodies, because if I can look at you and feel what you're feeling, I can learn from you, connect to you, I can love you. Empathy is one of our finer traits, and when it happens so easily, perhaps because, and this is brand new science, this is just out of the lab, we may have some special circuitry in our brains that helps us whenever we look at each other. Ask yourself, why do people get so involved, so deeply, deeply involved with such anguish, such pain, such nail-biting tension over football?
Cleveland Browns are gambling on defense.
Why are we such suckers for sports? And it's not just sports. We can lose it completely at the movies, at video games, watching a dance. Is there something about humans particularly, that allows us to connect so deeply when we watch other people? Watch them moving, watch them playing, watch their faces. Well, as it happens, scientists have an explanation for this strange ability to connect. It's new.
It had never been found on the cellular level before.
A set of brain cells found on either side of the head. Among all the billions of long branching cells in our brain, these so-called mirror neurons have surprising power.
What we found is the mechanism that underlies something which is absolutely fundamental to the way that we see other people in the world.
And it began entirely by accident at a laboratory in the lovely old city of Parma, Italy, where a group of brain researchers was working with monkeys. And they were testing a neuron, that's a brain cell, that always made this sound whenever the monkey would grab for a peanut. So the lab had all these peanuts around, and whenever the monkey made its move, the neuron would fire. Scientists thought, now here's a neuron that is essential to motion. It's a motor neuron. Then one day the monkey was just sitting around, not moving at all, just sitting, when a human scientist came into the lab. And when that scientist grasped the peanut, the monkey's cell fired. Now, the monkey hadn't moved. It was the human that had moved, suggesting that this neuron up here couldn't tell the difference between seeing something and doing something. Seeing and doing were the same. Or more intriguingly, that for this neuron, watching somebody do something is just like doing it yourself. The head of the lab, Giacomo Rizzolatti, thought, wow.
The same neurons, one neuron, fire both when the monkey observes something and when monkey is doing something. It's almost unbelievable.
It was surprising because this cell which was involved with motor planning for the monkey turned out to be interested in the movements of other people as well.
Some people call them monkey see, monkey do neurons, but the name that stuck is mirror neurons, because with them, the brain seems to mirror the movements it sees. This accidental discovery got scientists thinking, doing more tests, and it soon became pretty clear that this is not just a monkey thing. It's a people thing, too. We all know that humans learn by looking and copying. That's what infants do. First you look, then you do.
Ready? Let's see your feet this way.
And once you've watched and copied and learned a set of moves, you not only have them in your head.
Look, you put your shoe on.
If you see somebody else doing it, you can share the experience.
And you want to do it with me?
They know the moves, you know the moves, so you can move with them.
Wow.
If you can use the years of training that you yourself have done, learning to crawl, then learning to walk, then learning to eat, this is an incredibly rich set of knowledge that you could apply to the problem of actually seeing what's going on.
So that's why when I head down this street carrying all these packages, not only do people watch, look how they're watching. They feel my predicament, because they know what it's like to carry heavy packages. They all know about carrying. So as they watch me moving, they can feel themselves moving. Their neurons are mirroring the action. These neurons may be the brain's way of translating what we see so we can relate to the world.
The mirror system is the way that you tap into, the way that you harness your own abilities and project them out into the world.
And people are really good at watching and translating what we see. Like with just 13 moving dots, that's all there are here, you'll have no trouble recognizing these very ordinary activities. What's more, tests have shown when a person sees a movie like this of his own movement, he'll recognize it immediately as his own. And that's why sports fans tense with the action and wince and leap, because if you know the game, then your neurons are firing as if it's you playing, giving a whole new meaning to the phrase armchair quarterback. That's why it's so easy to be a sports fan. But there is more, suggests UCLA professor Marco Iacoboni. He thinks mirror neurons tie us not just to other people's actions, but to other people's feelings.
So the idea was to try to figure out how the emotional system and this motor system are connected together.
So I think when we understand the neuroscience behind something, it sort of is another deeper level of figuring out that, like, when you are carrying other people's stuff and when you come home from work and you feel overwhelmed by that, it's because you are a really well-developed person who is very good at their job and is and has honed this skill of empathizing. And so basically, because the brain builds from experience, when you choose a helping profession, you repeatedly engage in empathic engagement, you grow more mirror neurons, and this ability develops as a stronger capacity. That makes you someone that other people like being around, like being in relationship with, and it makes you more effective. You probably are a really good gift giver. You probably are really good at figuring out what people need because you've honed that skill. It's a talent that you need professionally. It's also a source of vulnerability when you recognize that, like, this empathic attunement has led to my absorbing stuff that in fact was not mine to hold. Sometimes just knowing that helps you kind of get some relief and let some of that go. Okay, so the other part, shifting gears. Oh, actually, before I shifted gears, I wanted to take another shorter stretch break. So it is almost 10 after, so let's take a stretch break until 11:15, and then we'll come back for the last 45 minutes. So keep your Zoom on if you could, and just step away for 5 minutes, and I'll see you very soon. Questions, comments, or thoughts about what we've been talking about before we move forward? How about a thumbs up if people are connecting, it's making sense? All right. Awesome. Thanks for the thumbs ups. Okay. All right. Dave, you can see my screen? Okay, good. All right, so at the beginning, I talked about this like foundational concept that we use to help us understand things that are happening within ourselves and others, which is that trauma is not determined by an event. Instead, it is influenced by the associations that we form during the experience of the event, which we've now spent a good amount of time talking about. The other part is the meaning that we make of events. So at this point in time, as we're moving into this school year, we should be asking ourselves, what is our narrative of this, of our experience of this? Are we, how are we storying our experience of the pandemic? What is the meaning that we're making of it? And how is it folding into our life narrative? Because two people can have the same experience, and the meaning that you make of it or the way that you fold it into your life story can influence a resilient response or an increase in vulnerability and lasting damaging impact. We should also be thinking about how our students are narrating this time in their life, because we can have a very positive influence on their ability to have an accurate and adaptive narrative. And we could be thinking about how their families are narrating this, and then what is the community or what we call collective narrative that's forming. We can influence all levels of that. Your narrative impacts the narrative of others, and as a helping professional, it's our responsibility to tend to our own narrative to make sure that we're having a positive influence on other people. So basically, a resilient narrative has 4 components. So first, you just want to think about, how am I narrating this? And then once you figure that out, even if it's not so great, that's fine, because meaning making is always fluid. It can always change. And all of our narratives are still forming. So everything is still in that very malleable stage right now, which is great. So a resilient narrative is one in which over time, related to some adversity, you shift your focus to what you can control. So for example, I've heard a lot of people say in the last week, we have to wear masks when we go back to school, but that was probably inevitable. And most other things that we weren't able to do are back online. So I'm feeling fine about that. So the meaning that we're making is that we're shifting to the things we cannot control, that the Delta variant popped up. We cannot control that it means that we have to wear masks. What we can control is the way that we story that. And then the second thing is that we're balancing our focus, attention, and effort and resources more on the lasting good than the challenges or the hard parts. So we do want to make sure that we are balancing true acknowledgement of impact with gradual increasing focus on the lasting good. It's important not to sugarcoat, and it's important not to get into what we call toxic positivity, where your group of people doesn't basically tolerate or allow any acknowledgement of the ways in which this is hard. There's a difference between excessive complaining and wallowing in the negative, and which is one extreme. The other extreme is toxic positivity, where you're basically not allowed to say that this is hard and just have people sit with it. So we want that balance of ways in which this is hard and the lasting good. Just want to check the chat here. Yes, at least we're going back to school. Good comment. Okay. So a shift in focus to what you can control, balancing acknowledgement of what's hard with recognition of what's the good that's coming out of it. And then a third thing is prediction of a positive outcome. So as you think about your story and you think about how are you thinking and feeling about like the school year, the upcoming holidays, next spring. And as you look ahead, are you predicting disaster, doom and gloom? Or are you starting to be able to grasp the idea that a better time will come, even though it might feel different than what would be your first hopes, or whatever, a better time will come. If you aren't yet in that place where you can predict a positive outcome, you're resilient. Your narrative is not what we would think of as like the most resilient it could be. And you want to try to shift that by paying attention to, again, the parts that you can control and the lasting good. And then a resilient narrative is one in which you own your fair share of accountability. My experience is that many people who work in schools own more than their fair share of accountability. For example, classroom teachers are really vulnerable this year to expecting of themselves that they can get their students caught up to where they would be had this not happened by June. That's very unlikely to happen. So when that doesn't happen and it's May and they haven't in fact gotten all their students caught up to where they would be had this not happened, they will own more than their fair share of accountability for that and story that as a personal failure or lack of competence. So I'm trying right now to strongly influence the narrative that teachers are holding going into this year by saying this is not about catching up, and it never was. No one's behind. And you are not, in fact, going to get your students to the place they would be had this not happened. Shift that story going in to improve their resilience in the long run. And as we notice things like deep impact, we want to look at in what way would I be accountable for that? And if we have some share of accountability, own it, learn from it, integrate it, and let it go. And then let the rest, the responsibility for the rest lie where it should. So I'm not going to play this video, but I just wanted to include it because I know in every group there's people who are fascinated by the research that's behind some of the strategies that we talk about. And so this is August 2021, just hot off the presses research. And this is a really interesting video that's about 10 minutes long, and it's linked in your handout. And it talks about something that they call reappraisal, which is very similar to thinking about meaning making and paying attention to people's narrative and shifting people's narrative. So they talked about a global study in all different parts of the world where they worked with groups of people on thinking about how they were reappraising or appraising how the pandemic was impacting them. And they have incredibly positive outcomes from this intervention. So it's just, if you're interested in looking at that, it's fascinating, and the video is well done. Okay, so last year I did sort of a example of this, and some of you, if you were part of any of the school groups that I met with between March and June, some of you may have in fact participated in this. So I did a little exercise between March and June where I had any opportunity to do professional development. And a lot of this was just a faculty meeting pop-in or different ways that I had to interface with groups of schools. So between March and June, I was actually able to do this with 800 Vermont school professionals, so people who work in schools. And so I wanted to share this with you because it's a really hopeful kind of outcome. So the first thing I did is I read a quote from an article that was written by a national educational consultant, Kylene Beers. And Kylene wrote in February of 2021, "In a world where we want them to experience all they can do, and them as our students, in a world where we want them to experience all they can do, they have been put behind see-through plastic screens on desks pushed 6 feet apart and told all that they can't do. To dare say our kids are behind is to demean all the parents and teachers in this nation who have done their best under circumstances we never dared imagine, but experienced each and every day." So when we talked about that quote, we talked about this, there's an idea of a collective narrative. And the collective narrative that was forming in the winter and early spring of 2021 is that this generation of students is behind, and that our job as people who work in schools is to catch them up. That narrative was what I would consider inaccurate and maladaptive. So a narrative that's accurate and adaptive promotes your resilience. A narrative that's inaccurate and maladaptive keeps you back and increases damaging impact of events. So our job when we're listening to ourselves, our loved ones, people we work with, our students, and we hear things that they say that are indications of how they're storying experiences, we're listening to, is this accurate and is this adaptive? And if not, our job is to try to shift or disrupt that. And I think of it as this. I think of it as a story. Meaning making is like pieces falling into place as we're understanding what we experience. And when I hear pieces falling into place in an accurate and adaptive way, I say something to reinforce it and agree with it and help strengthen it. When I hear one that's maladaptive or inaccurate, I try to ask a question, shift attention to another aspect of the situation through my comments or questions, respectfully disagree, offer an opposing view, with the intention of simply throwing the pieces up again and seeing if they might resettle in a more accurate and adaptive way. The best way to change someone's narrative is not through one long conversation. It's through many short doses in which you try to basically crack the foundation of a narrative that's inaccurate or maladaptive and shift it. The good news for those of you who work in schools is that most of your interactions with other people are brief. And so you can make it brief and pointed of a dose where you just try to get in there. A simple example would be a student who comes in from recess and you say, hey, how was recess? And they say, terrible, I hate this school, no one here likes me. Inaccurate, maladaptive meaning making of whatever went on at recess that you don't really know about. You simply offer a reaction or a response that tries to prevent that from settling in as true. You don't want to endorse that. So basically you say, wow, so surprised that someone who I in fact know is well liked would feel like that. Later on, I want to hear what possibly could have gone on at recess that would make you feel that way. And then you move on. So it's just these short doses of interactions. So I noticed last winter that, and many of us, I don't want to own this, like many of us have talked about this narrative that our kids are behind and how frustrated we are by that and how worried we are by that. And it makes us heartsick. And many of us have our own kids and it feels very personal. And so we had an instinct to resist that was correct, because that is inaccurate and maladaptive to say this generation of kids is behind. So I tried this intervention and all these opportunities I had, and it ended up being 800 people where we tried to shift it. And so what Kylene Beers went on to say in her article is that from her experience as a national consultant, she believes that this generation of kids, pre-K to 12, is actually going to be ahead of where they would be had this not happened in these 8 developmental areas. So I asked these 800 educators and all these little experiences to look at these 8 things and write in the chat if they noticed any evidence that their students were in fact ahead of where they would be had this not happened. Every time I did this, I got reams and reams and reams of comments in the chat saying, yes, 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 all of them, or this one or that one, with great examples. So the teachers and educators and people who work in schools in Vermont said that this generation of kids is in fact more empathic and more compassionate than they would be had this not happened. For example, students seem to know in a way that's more instinctive now when one of their peers reacts in an unexpected way or is struggling, that there's something more likely going on than what we know. And they are more considerate of that or step back and kind of let the adults sort that out rather than jumping in with judgment and reactivity. This generation of kids is more patient and they have practiced and improved their ability to be bored. Boredom is a really important part of growing a healthy brain and regulatory system. One of the things I was very worried about before the pandemic is how terrible this generation of kids was at being bored, because we had been filling every nook and cranny of their lives where they would be otherwise waiting or delaying gratification or having to create some way to self-entertain. We were filling it with technology, and we were robbing them of all of those moments in which really important executive functioning skills would have developed. So good news, that problem is solved. They've all been remarkably bored and are much better at that now. Great. They are better at grieving. An example of that would be many teachers said that students now understand in a way they didn't before that everyone's loss is their own and there's no hierarchy. So an example was a kindergarten teacher who said that in morning share, one of the students shared that they were really sad that they couldn't have a birthday party because of COVID. And another student shared that their grandfather had passed away and that they weren't able to go visit their grandfather and say goodbye. And the class had a remarkably sophisticated ability to validate both losses and not worry about one being potentially more important than the other, or pushing out the grief over the birthday party in place of the other. We just seem to have this idea now that we have, we have a resource of offering each other empathy and support for loss that is not a finite amount, and that we have an endless amount of that to give around, and everyone's loss is important and worthy. A lot of teachers talked about how students are appreciating things that they previously took for granted, and that their perspective has shifted in a healthy way, and that they're more flexible because they're not getting so worked up or rigid or upset about things that now they realize are actually relatively small. That is supports then a reset of priorities in a way that we would argue are healthier or better. We've had to practice sitting with powerful emotions. There was a sort of a dynamic going on prior to the pandemic that many of you might have heard me talk about, which was this concern I had around adults not being able to tolerate their children or students experiencing positive stress. So we were too quickly swooping in to take away positive stress in order to help kids feel better in that moment, robbing them of the opportunity to sit with emotion and learn how to feel and put words to and cope with emotion when life throws us typical smaller challenges or disappointments. So that whole dynamic shifted because the adults we had no ability to take away a lot of the disappointment and unfair and discouraging and scary and hard things that were happening. So I certainly wish that had never happened, but one of the outcomes is that we had to just sit with kids and help them get better at feeling emotions, sitting with emotions, putting words to them, and learning how to cope with them. And so that is a direct fuel for resilience. We also have practiced citizenship. So teachers gave a lot of examples of how students were asked to be strong community members. They were asked to contribute. They were asked to chip in. They were asked to be flexible. They were asked to do things like mask wearing, which benefits others even more so than themselves. So they're stronger citizens, and they have an understanding of what citizenship means through lived experience, which is always the most powerful way. And then finally, there was strong agreement that we are asking and teaching and modeling for our students how to listen, ask questions, and challenge inequity, regardless of whether it impacts them directly. So the thing that we've been talking about then is, if this generation of kids is stronger in these 8 areas and is deeply impacted in some ways in terms of mental health, family struggle, learning loss, we actually are in relatively good shape, because the things that they're going to need intervention and support for are well within our skill set. Supporting people with mental health issues, supporting people with learning loss, that's what we all do. We know how to do that. We're very skilled. we were, to be honest, grappling with how to build these 8 things in kids, because they're hard to teach and they're better gained through lived experience. So I think this generation of kids is going to be actually remarkably strong. I can't wait to see them as adults. I think we and they are in very good shape. So that narrative needs to shift and can shift when we do these interventions where we really look at what does that mean when we say this generation of kids are behind. A 5th grader asked me last year, am I not going to be as good of an adult because of this? And I said, why would you ask that? And he said, because my parents and everybody else is saying that we're behind. So our narrative influences their narrative, and our narrative also impacts our own resilience. So I think we're in pretty good shape. So if we're not behind, then what are we doing? And so what I would offer as a potential replacement for that collective narrative is that we're integrating. What we know about trauma is that we don't necessarily heal or recover. Those are misleading terms because they imply that you're going to somehow move on from, forget the adversity as if it never happened. And that isn't actually what we do when we help in a healthy way, when we move through and beyond adversity. We integrate it into our identity. We notice the associations that we formed, and we decide whether we're going to keep them or shift them. And then we think about the life story that we're building, and we think about how it's getting interwoven in. That's all integration. So this school year really should be about slowing down, setting the pace according to the humans that are in front of us, absolutely doing some rigorous academic learning because that's really good for us and part of our main community responsibility. But in the context of that, the pace that we go at that is according to the needs of the human in front of us, and according to our own pacing and needs as well, because we're all integrating a pretty powerful experience on all those levels of association and meaning making and identity formation. And if we tend to that integration, if we create space for that integration, we will all be much, much stronger and healthier as we move through and beyond this. And the sky will be the limit for what this group of kids and we can do. So in order to do that, we have to have the ability to hold 2 competing truths. And I believe that we're very capable of this. The competing truths are that this generation of kids and we ourselves are deeply impacted. And this generation of kids is going to be amazing and already are, in fact, quite amazing. That's not new for any of us. Every one of us in this meeting works with students that are more vulnerable, students that have experienced a variety of adversities, which may or may not have involved trauma. But we have held for many years this competing truth that they are deeply impacted by the adversity in their lives and equally amazing, and their potential is really strong. So we actually have more experience with this than some of the other people in our community. So we can hold an anchor and ground in that so that we resist allowing this narrative to solidify that this generation of kids is somehow behind or damaged. So how do you resist or how do you support a resilient narrative? So first of all, empower yourself and others to own the narrative. So if somebody says something about you, if you hear yourself say something and you don't think it's what you don't like it, you don't want it to be the case, then think about what would you change it with? What would you replace it with? Remember that it's short, frequent doses. It's not about changing someone's mind in one interaction. And then there's some ideas in brainstorming here around different ways that you could do this work with your students. I just want to read Gregory's comment here. Completely agree. If you could have seen how my kiddos class engaged with and supported my client and each other during the past year, compassion, understanding, positive interactions, including verbal praise and task support. Through a stressful year, I discovered even more how capable and resilient our youth can be. It definitely impacted my work and my view of this generation of kids. Thank you for sharing that, Gregory. I mean, it really is, I believe the students are the most valuable and most underutilized resource in the school. And bringing students together to help each other and help us is an incredibly powerful way to show them that they can have positive influence and get their sense of agency back. So we've all felt somewhat out of control, and we've all felt vulnerable in the past year and a half. So giving people roles and responsibilities is a great way to get people re-engaged. So it was so helpful that you let, your clients' students, jump in and help. That helped their resilience as well as your student. Other thoughts or comments as we think about this idea? Okay, so I had an opportunity earlier this week to pilot a idea that I have with one of the school districts I work with, where we want to actually share some of the information that I'm sharing with you this morning with students and with high school students. So I came up with sort of a version of a presentation that would share some of these ideas with the students. And then I met with a small group of students to pilot it and get feedback from them. So one of the things I learned from the students is that they totally understood the concept of associations and meaning making. That made perfect sense to them. And they liked the idea of thinking about what is their narrative. But when I asked them to do a turn and talk about, like, if your life story were a newspaper article, what would the title be? If your story were a movie, what would the title be? If your life were a hashtag, what would it be? I tried to come up with ways for them to think about their story and communicate it to each other. The feedback from the students is that that's too hard and or a little more vulnerable than they felt ready to do with their peers in school, which was really helpful feedback. So their suggestion, which I'll now pass on to you, is that they thought it would be better if I put up funny pictures of animals and let people choose which one is most represents which one or ones, pick one or more, that best represents your story in the past year. So let's try it right now. So take a look at these, and I should have numbered them or something. But if you're in a room with a group of people, just turn and talk in the room of people and tell each other which one or more represents you in the past year. And then so if some of you are watching alone, if you could write in the chat which one you connect with. Literally all of them. Yep. I love it. So what's interesting is that it's important to include some examples of animals that are kind of content. And some of you are saying the dog in the pool, he's really content. And one thing that's really interesting is that this past year, there were elements that were super comfortable for some people. Some people thrived being home and more isolated and away, and are actually going to grieve some parts of this past year as they potentially re-enter in-person work. And so it's important to remember that it wasn't all awful for everyone. So yeah, and some of you are definitely connecting with that image. All right, so it looks like the kids were right. As always, the kids are brilliant. And they came up with a great idea. So If you're trying to tap into other people's stories or that of your student, I think that the idea of creating a collage, basically the students just said make it visual. So creating a collage with images. Some students are artists, some students could find a song to play for you. It seemed very soon for people to put words to their experience in a thematic way. So that was helpful feedback for me because I thought that we would be ready for that. And so I'm grateful for them for this feedback in this activity. Okay. Okay, so a few thoughts then as we start thinking about wrapping up is one of the most important things in terms of our own well-being and the well-being of our community is that as we move into this school year, we want to remember that healing from or integrating adversity includes shifting from speed and reflexivity to slower pace and curiosity. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we were reacting, and many of us had to rise to the occasion and speed up our pace. And that was an adaptive shift to contend with the challenge ahead. As we move into the coming school year, there's going to be a sense of urgency on a few levels, a sense of urgency around the fact that there is a really expanded mental health situation in our community that needs our attention. There is the obligation to tend to the learning progression of our students and all kinds of other things. So urgency and there being a lot of work to do is going to potentially risk us shifting back to a reflexive pace, which is not wise at this point in the situation. So it's going to require us to have some kind of internal anchoring where we set a pace each day and then keep trying to hold the pace that we know is going to allow us to be well and our students to be well and our colleagues to be well. And in many ways, that's going to feel like you're potentially shopping at Costco on a rainy Saturday, wishing to have a leisurely shop while everyone else is like racing around you and you're having trouble maneuvering, something like that. That's my image of it. I don't know what your image would be. So I think I think of it, I'm like a metaphor person. I do well if I have a metaphor to help ground me. And so my metaphor is like the gear shift. And so I'm thinking about this idea of downshifting, like my pace is set at from the summer that I was able to have. My pace is pretty slow and steady. And I intend to keep that moving into the year. And when I notice that there's an external or internal force urging me to speed up, I'm trying to hold and downshift and do things to ground myself because I know that I will be more effective and if I stay at slow and steady and pull people there with me. So, that's going to be easier said than done. One of the techniques that you could use if you think like, well, I'm not, maybe some of you are like, I'm pretty good at that. Great. If this is something that you think is an area of vulnerability for you, there's an activity that you can do. One of the ways you can anchor your pace is to do a values activity. When we have strong values, like a personal mission or clear values, they can anchor us when we feel like we're getting pulled outside of our desired kind of mode. So values guide our behavior. They ground us when we're overwhelmed. They help us set priorities and boundaries in terms of of all the things I could put effort into today. Where am I going to focus my effort? It helps you draw those lines in a way that over time is going to help you feel like you had meaningful impact rather than just played whack-a-mole. And they help us measure success in meaningful ways, because even if there were 500 things I could have done today and I ended up doing 14, if they were 14 things that connect to what I value the most with my professional effort, I'm able to feel successful and good about what I accomplished, even though it's obvious that there's so much more I could have done. So there's a link here to a short values exercise that you could do if you're interested. And it is it's pretty fun and short. It might take you 15 minutes, and it would help you efficiently come up with an idea of what your values might be and help ground you in that way. Okay, so I'm looking at the time. I just want to stop screen share for a minute and come back to my presentation and see what my priority might be. Okay, I know exactly what my priority will be. So I want to make one more point and then open it up to questions and comments. So I would say one of the most helpful concepts to focus on in the past year and a half has been replacing perfectionism and these ways that we might be kind of hard on ourselves with direct effort around self-compassion. And in your handout, there's a whole slide that has TED Talks and activities and articles that you can read about self-compassion. And I would strongly encourage you to think about that, because it's a life-shifting move that you can make by focusing on self-compassion. So basically, the concept is that self-esteem is measured by whether or not you feel that you are meeting your own standards or what other people expect of you. If you are a motivated, self-driven person who wants to be high achieving, you rarely, in fact, meet your own standards or what you perceive other people to expect of you. So your self-esteem is actually fleeting and often not with you, and that can contribute to insecurity and anxiety and self-deprivation. So instead, we want to think about self-compassion, which is with you no matter what. On your worst day, on your best day, and everything in between, self-compassion is right there with you. And the three components of self-compassion are self-kindness. So treat yourself the way you would treat others. If you walk in the grocery store and you get a cart and you're standing in the produce section and you reach for your list and realize that you forgot it at home, and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid, I can't believe I did that. This is where self-compassion comes in, and you're like, wait a minute. If a friend texted me from the grocery store and said I forgot the list, I would not text back, well, you're really dumb, I always knew that, right? No, you would not do that. So treat yourself the way you would treat others. In that moment, you want to take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm here without a list. Fascinating. I'm also here with like relatively no short-term memory capacity anymore. So we'll see how this goes, right? Common humanity is reaching out to others and recognizing that other people's lives are as imperfect as our own. And that involves you taking that vulnerable step when you feel like you messed up or you're not your best self or things are hard, reaching out to the people that you trust to say, I went to the grocery store without a list today and I got about like nothing that we actually needed. And I'm really frustrated with myself because I feel like I keep forgetting things. 99% of the time, what you're going to hear back is, oh my gosh, me too. I had a similar experience. That connection and realization that other people's lives are as imperfect as your own allows you to walk away from that connection more patient with yourself, more empathic with yourself. What's fascinating is that the compassion that you dole out to other people all day long comes from a resource that is fueled by self-compassion and you allowing other people to offer you support, absorbing the support of others. When other people offer support, don't deflect, accept. And every time you make a mistake, it's an opportunity to be compassionate and graceful with yourself and fuel that vat that you use to dole out to others. And the last is mindfulness. So being present with what is without judgment. Okay. I could say a lot more about that, but that would be a whole nother training. So questions, thoughts, comments that folks have in the few minutes that we have left. So all of your program directors have the set of slides. If I will put my email in the chat right now in case that is not true, and you can email me for the slides, but your program directors all should have those. All right, Dave, I'm not seeing any final questions, so I think we are a wrap.
Yes, I don't see any either, Joelle. So I think we are all good. And thank you for your time this morning and sharing all of that lovely information with us. And thanks again.
You're very welcome. Good luck, everybody. Take care of yourselves as you move into the year.